In the next 50 minutes we shall sail together southwards from the extreme maritime north of Croatia, along the coast of Istria, Croatia's biggest peninsula, via Krk, the biggest island, then by the beaches and coves of Cres and Lošinj, all the way to Olib, Silba, and finally the surrealism of Pag. Although meant primarily for sailors, this video will at times put into land and guide you through the interior of Istria and the Northern Islands. If you love sailing, you'll also love the local wining and dining, and the pilot will reveal a bit about the admirable fare on offer in the restaurants of the area, though out-and-out hedonists might well want to graduate to our gourmet video guide to the Croatian Adriatic, which reveals almost all culinary secrets of the archipelago's eateries. On this pleasant trip we shall come upon romantic Cove Zadar, the biggest sunshade in the Adriatic, the inquisitive griffon vulture, people after a very special kind of holiday, and members of our tried and trusted, engaging and omnipresent Dream Point team. If you sail in the Northern Adriatic, you will find a string of well-ordered and equipped marinas along the western coast of Istria, and the islands also provide, apart from the occasional marina, a very respectable number of safe anchorages. And yet, in spite of the many havens in these waters, one has to pay due respect to the local wind called the Bora, which sweeps down off the land. At any time of the year, the power of its storms can give some nasty shocks throughout the area, but particularly in the Velebit Channel. The tides in the Northern Adriatic are more sensible than in the south, and yet the difference between high and low is seldom more than a metre, while the currents do not constitute an important factor while sailing and have to be reckoned with only occasionally, for example in the passage between Cres and Lošinj. Summer air temperatures are stable and high. The surface layers of the sea range from a comfortable 23 to as high as 26 degrees centigrade. For lovers of deep-sea diving, one ought to mention that this part of the Adriatic has a number of attractive submarine localities. We will mention just Margarina Cape on the island of Susak, spots around Chutin Islet off Cres, and the seabeds of Mala and Velika Srakane. Off the northwest coast of Cres, you can come upon one of the many vessels that have gone down to the bottom of the Adriatic. The Northern Adriatic is an area of remarkable diversity, and you have to sail round it, journey, even relax, with all your senses fully attuned and alert to experience its plenitude to the maximum. So, without more ado, let's set sail. We shall start our voyage round the western coast of Istria, Croatia's biggest peninsula, from sophisticated Umag, sailing into Umag Bay, watching out for the signal buoys, and then tying up in the ACI marina on the northern, or by the pier at the southern side of the harbour. The tourist tradition in Umag can be felt at every step, particularly visible in the restaurateurs who compete with both their welcoming smiles and their seafood menus. But we could recommend a trip inland to the vernacular Istrian tavern called Bushchina, where you can relish subtle coquille Saint-Jacques, Istrian minestrone and supica, as well as traditional delights like truffles and game. Sailing south from Umag, we have to take heed of the numerous coastal shallows. After some 7 miles, the lighthouse on the pier, the coppice and the one-time basilica of St. Pelagius announce our arrival in the old Byzantine settlement of Neapolis, today's Novigrad. After another hour's sailing, we come to a town situated on an attractive point, Porec, one of the liveliest summer centres in the whole Adriatic. It's worth walking round the quaint Porec streets and taking a look at the atrium, baptistry, mosaics and apse of the famed Euphrasia Basilica. while those who want swimming and water sports might drop in at neighbouring tourist spots, the Blue and Green Lagoons. In the next part of our voyage round the west coast of Istria, the appealing little island of Sveti Juraj is a sign that we have arrived off Vrsar, a quaint little place surrounded by pretty beaches and traditionally the oldest and best regarded naturist area in the Adriatic. Vrsar harbour is well protected from winds and high seas and has recently been enhanced with a new marina. Try a stroll around the picturesque little village above the harbour and take in the pretty Basilica of St Mary. 2 miles sail to the south lies Lim Fjord, one of the handsomest natural phenomena along the coast of Western Istria. In this gorgeous 5-mile-long inlet, independent sailing is allowed only as far as the Yellow Buoy at the entrance, after which you can only go on in a tour boat. The reason is the biggest stretch of oyster beds in the northern Adriatic. Just how fresh and tempting they are you can find out in the Viking restaurant, where, as well as crab and lobster salad and a whole array of shellfish, we would like to suggest the delicate dish known as bavette alto mare. A collection of quaint little islands, led by Sveti Ivan, hides in its straits the dangerous Same shoals, and the little archipelago is also a sign that we have come to Rovin, another Istrian tourist jewel, the old centre of which is located on a hill, and is the first dream point of the northern Adriatic. Rovin is equally dear to eye and heart, by day and by night. After working up an appetite round its steep and twisty streets, it's not a bad idea to head for the gastronomic oasis of Giannino's restaurant, unmatched champion of the art of pasta and seafood. If we go on southwards, we will, unluckily, have to give Brioni a miss, because tying up and anchoring is still forbidden in these charming waters. We can tie up in Istria's biggest city, Pula, where you might like to look in at the arena, the 3-story high Roman amphitheatre, and the 6th biggest of its kind in the world. If you don't fancy tying up in a city harbour, we would recommend sailing on southwards to some nearby havens and coves. One such is Stoia Bay, while the next, Varuda by name, hides a well-appointed marina. The best-looking safe anchorage can be found in spacious Solina Bay, concealed behind Varuda Islet. If you get hungry in these havens, you might like to dip a bit deeper into your pocket and visit 2 elite and rather high-priced restaurants. The first is called Milan in Stoia Bay, where, with many another delicacy, they offer brodetto of monkfish. The other, named Valsabion, located in Piesciana Bay, abounds with witty and sophisticated recipes, like, for example, the 3 risottos in a wheel of cheese. We will end our trip around the western coast of Istria at the very Cape, with a view of imposing Porre Lighthouse, a luminous mark for mariners within a range of 25 miles. Rounding Porre, after Kamniak Point, we come upon the curiously jagged Medulin Bay, with Pomer village and marina in the western, and the town of Medulin in the eastern arm, while the attractive little island of Boduljash is located at the eastern exit. The southern part of the eastern coast of Istria, in spite of its ruggedness, is a little cold and unapproachable, and so after passing the lights on Trnapunta and Skavaranski Point, we drop briefly into the good shelter of Prkog Bay. The first interesting settlement on this coast is Tourist Rabats, a good haven from all winds except southerlies, in which you can tie up at the main quay or drop anchor off the hotel beaches. Only 10 miles to the north, the first mooring is in Moschenička Draga, where, alongside a pretty pebbled beach, it's a good idea to visit the Johnson restaurant. If you like fresh fish, not to mention the fish soup, poached scorpion fish, and first-rate herbal grappa. The next place worth looking around is Lovran, in which you can tie up to a longish pier in calm weather or try to find room at the smaller quay of the town's port. Urbane Lovran is known for its lovely summer residences and villas, some of which have been turned into graceful private pensions. On our way north, we could halt for a moment in well-known Ichichi Marina, and then push on towards Apatia, the town with the longest tourist tradition in the northern Adriatic. There is a real little gem just a mile to the north. The port and peaceful small town of Velosco seem removed from the hustle and bustle of Kvana tourism, but this does not mean there is no eatery worth visiting. We would particularly mention the Bavandica restaurant and its sea edge terrace, where, as well as an opulent choice of cold seafood hors d'oeuvre, one just has to try the salted fish. In Kvana, an area with a long tourist tradition, in some restaurants you can come across the most bizarre offerings. To sail along the coast of Istria without taking a peek into the interior of this charming peninsula would be a major blunder. So we advise even the most impassioned of sailors to find a safe mooring for their vessels and visit some of the lovely little places located on the hilltops of the interior. There is Motovan, with its streets, squares, views, and its curious horticulture. Groznan, with its equally charming street houses and scenes. Lovely Draguc, filled with typical Istrian motifs, and surreal little churches. Hum, officially the world's smallest city, the impressive Glagolites Avenue. These are just some of the striking spots that make it worthwhile leaving your ship in harbour. Going round the interior of Istria, you will find some surprising landscapes. The famed red soil set off with vineyards, olive groves, hospitable producers of local grappas like Bisca and Medica, and highly indigenous urbane scenes. We heartily recommend all gourmets not to leave the region without dropping in at some of the taverns and trying the legendary truffles, wild mushrooms, asparagus, local prosciutto, and marvellous local recipes like Istrian supizza, pasta with truffles, scrambled egg with asparagus, or countless delights based on game. In short, the interior of Istria as a whole deserves the coveted Dream Point title. In spite of recent discussions concerned with the precise dimensions of the islands of Sres and Kirk, officially, Kirk, with its 409 square kilometres and 70 little towns, is still the biggest island in the Adriatic. As well as this, Kirk has a very rich past. And then there are the striking contrasts between east and west coast, and a number of gastronomic surprises. Kirk also boasts a range of indigenous phenomena, of which we'll make special mention only of the interesting Sopila musicians and the special local wine called Žlachtina. Sailors have to be aware that in these waters lies the Sremska Vrata, very likely the most ill-famed strait in the Adriatic, where in winter and summer alike the Bora can reach hurricane force. We will start our voyage around Kirk from the best protected haven on the eastern coast, Solina Bay, where one has to keep to the centre because of the shoals. At the very end of the bay, healing sand and mud enhances the shallow bottom and coast. Some tourists even indulge to excess in this natural source of health. The bay accommodates the village of Klimna, with its 60-metre-long quay, pretty little harbour and unusual recognition symbol. The next shelter from the winds, though not from the border, is given in Stipania Bay, more precisely by the longish pier of Shilo village. And if we go on sailing the eastern coast towards the south, we will come upon a good refuge from the bore in Petrina Bay, where we can anchor peacefully on sand about 7 metres deep. After a couple of miles, you will be met by the impressive 50-metre-high cliff, home to the most picturesque of Kirk towns, Vrbnik, homeland of the already mentioned wine Zlachtina. With a fine old library and lovely little streets in which practically every house is a wine cellar. In the harbour at the foot of the cliffs, one can leave the boat by the high but not overlong pier only in calm weather, and then get to Vrbnik itself and visit that imaginative gourmet haunt, the Nada Tavern. Here we particularly recommend the delicate black risotto, which is to be washed down with what else but a noble draught of Zlachtina. From Vrbnik, we are off to the south behind Tenki Point and Kamenyak Rock, sailing along an impressive rocky coast devoid of any good havens. Then, after Sokol Point, peaking into Long Vela Bay, which, however, if there is a strong bora blowing, we have to steer clear of. The next island settlement we sail to is Bashka, a little tourist town set in a lovely bay that owes its reputation to a famed pebble beach, one of the longest in the Adriatic, and to the quaint old centre with its Mediterranean feel. The long quay in Bashka is fitted out with fixed buoys and is a reasonable refuge from the winds. If, after Bashka, we go behind Shkulica Point and pass through the Senske Vrata, we will sail into a more welcoming and calmer western side of Kirk, where we can first of all have a look at the mainly holiday home settlement of Stara Bashka, and then go along a coast filled with pretty strands in the coves of Drenova, Pokriva and Konoba as far as the deep bay and correspondingly good shelter of Punat. In Punat, after the safety buoys, you will be greeted by the only marina of the island, enhanced with a good infrastructure and the hospitable old salt Damia. There is music and dancing at nights and a collection of knots at the Vela Voda restaurant, in which you really ought to try deep-fried anglerfish in white wine sauce. After not quite 2 miles sailing westwards, we will come upon the biggest settlement of the island, Kirk town, the city walls and towers bidding us welcome like the fairly large pier. If you stroll along the attractive streets, cast a glance at the cathedral and main square, and if you are lucky, you might come upon some sopila players, traditional performers of the local music. Sailing north from Kirk, we'll pass a green shore alongside Glavotok and Pelava points, and then arrive at Malinska. When entering the port, we have to avoid the red buoy and then look for a mooring at one of the 2 piers. Not far from Malinska itself is the tourist-oriented fishing village of the Haludovo Hotel, where moorings can also sometimes be found. Although the waterfront and pier of the next town, Njivica, appear to promise places to tie up, mooring here in the summer depends very much on your lucky stars. Njivica is good to stroll around at your leisure, and when you have got hungry, head for the Rivica restaurant, where, as well as the seafood menu, you can try the vernacular Shkulica with widely famed scampi, topping it all off with rojata or tiramisu. We'll finish off this island voyage in the northernmost port of Omišalj, in its long bay, and then set sail for neighbouring Stres, where new maritime delights await us. If you want to enjoy impressive island heights, idyllic pebbled beaches, hidden coastal taverns, Vransko Lake, surreal Mediterranean scenes, if you want a breath of ancient times, or the best lamb in the Croatian Adriatic, and if you are not going to be fazed by sudden vicious blasts of the Bora, then you have to sail the waters of Stres. Around this 68-kilometre long island, you have to sail some 75 miles, watching as it drops from north to south, feeling all the time how the nature and beauty are turning you into a passionate lover of the area. We shall start our sail round this lovely archipelago with a visit to the chief town of the island, Sres town, in which there are actually two marinas, one in the city harbour and one in the southern leg of the bay. The heady Mediterranean mood of Sres is filled out with the Renaissance spirit of the vernacular building as well as Venetian touches, so it is certainly worth walking along the many little streets, looking at the south and north city gates, the round tower on the southwest corner of the city, the church towers, coats of arms on the facades, looking into the odd courtyard, and finally taking in the attractive scene of the town's little harbour, an integral part of the main square. Some might want to jog through the town, and some try the fantastic baked sea bass in the Bellona restaurant. More active travellers might like a trip to the village of Loznati, some 3.5 kilometres distant, where there is a nice view of the eastern coast of the island, and in the idyllic vernacular atmosphere of the Bulaleta restaurant, you can try legendary crisp-fried Sres lamb. If you sail towards the south, then don't leave wide Sres Bay at once, because at the southern end of it is the first island dream point spot, the lovely little town of Valun. Sailors have a 30-metre jetty to tie up at here, or they can anchor just off the town and then take a dip from the beach and walk over to the parish church, which displays the famed 11th century Valun tablet written in the Glagolitic script. It is also worth climbing up to St Mark's Church above the town, and then going back to the harbour where, in season, you will find some surreal Asiatic elements. Winers and diners can be safely directed to the Namoru restaurant, where, as well as the usual seafood treats, you can order a traditional Sres recipe called kalandraka, lamb in a sauce with new potatoes. If the boat is safely tied up, then it's worth setting aside some time to make the road trip to nearby Lubenica, a startling prehistoric settlement located on top of impressive 378-metre high cliffs that swoop down to the sea. In the town you can enjoy an impressive view over the western coast of the island and walk along the two crooked streets that today hold a population of just 43. Now we will quit Valun and Lubenica, sail southwards, bypass the islet of Zaglav and make a brief halt in idyllic Sveti Ivan Bay, where you can anchor, swim on the lovely beach, and if you have missed the road trip to Lubenica, you can climb to it via a steep goat track. In the continuation of the voyage, it's a good idea to visit the next bay, Zhanya, mostly because of the picturesque submarine cavern, the Blue Grotto, the name of which you will understand completely if you swim, or because of the tide, dive into it. It is at its most beautiful just before sunset. Some 4 miles on, after the striking Kiat's Point, lies Martinštica, a well-protected harbour in which only southerlies cause any trouble, and in which one can tie up to the pier at the eastern side or even on the outer or western side. The neighbouring settlement, Miholashčica, has a touristy feel about it, and sailors will want to go on to the south as far as the well-protected Žal Bay below the village of Ustrina, where the muddy bottom provides a good anchorage in both the northern end, Porat, and in the southern leg, Banestrovica. And here we are in one more Tsres jewel, ancient Osor, familiar mooring of old for those sailing from Venice towards Otranto. You can tie up at the western quay and in the eastern part as well, but in any event do watch out for the powerful currents flowing into the channel dividing Tsres and Lochin. This man-made canal was actually dug in Roman times. In the canal the minimum depth is 2 meters, and the bridge opens to let boats through at 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Osor is a museum of a town, and every nook of it is worth a look. After the attractive divers have greeted you, take a stroll round the city centre of today and look at the town hall and archaeological museum. The church of St. Gaudentius, patron saint of the town and Osor waters, past the remains of the Franciscan monastery overlooking a pretty strand, the city walls, all the way to the ancient remains and other proofs of Osor's rich and stormy past. Sailing the Lochin Channel towards the southern point of Tsres and Suha Point, we can visit 2 good shelters from the Bora. The first is in Kalidont Bay, and the second is called Martinštica, both of them offering good facilities for anchoring and bathing. We'll start our look round the eastern coast of Tsres from the very south, from attractive little Pogana and the cove of Jadrištica, where one can tie up to the inside of a short pier at a depth of 2 meters, or even drop anchor to the sandy bottom. If you're in luck, in Zlatko Matuzin's Pogana Tavern, on the terrace right by the sea, as well as the usual fish fare, you can get some wonderful baked kid, and this is something not to be missed. The exceptionally indented southeastern coast of Tsres provides a whole series of lovely bays. In the first of them, Baldarin, you have to sail with care, however, watching out for the rock before the eastern end. The next one, Meli, is pleasant for anchoring and bathing, but you have to be careful because at low tide you can hit a sandbank located somewhere in the middle. Before going on along the coast of Tsres to the north, it's worth sailing over to the amazingly rugged little island of Trstenik, which you can recognize by its lighthouse, the pretty eastern coast hiding dangerous shallows and pluses. The coast on the return to Tsres is also very indented. Just behind Kolorat Point, where there is a cove of the same name, a fairly popular nautical reserve. In the wealth of bays and coves below the settlement of Punta Krija, we can take a quiet look into Maishka and then into the most deeply recessed one called Ul. Sailing along the coast to the north, sailors ought to take notice once again of the ill-famed Bora, as well as of the paucity of settlements along the shore. If the Bora whistles, Tovarashchica Bay is not a good haven. In any further exploration of Tsres, do stop off around the islets of Mali and Veliki Chutin, and if possible dive in the waters. The underwater world of this area is one of the most attractive in the whole of the Adriatic. Galboka and Meli coves are right by these islands, the first of them offering some kind of protection from the Bora. The next bay, Koromachna, is the port and swimming spot for the town of Belay, and the local people have built a pier here, with, however, a whole gaggle of pluses in front of it. Continuing northwards, we have to sail a long time without any shelter or larger bays. The first to come up is Kruščica, while the next, Poje, has a nice strand, and it is possible to anchor and bathe. Finally, by way of farewell to Tsres, we have chosen the second Dream Point Island destination, the lovely and prehistoric little city of Beli, more than 4,000 years old. Located on the very northern end of the island's coastline, with an attractive little harbour and pebble beach, Beli does not offer good protection from all the whims of the Bora. but everything else in and about it is more than worth a visit, and the prestigious Dream Point label. Let's start with a series of panoramic views from this jewel of Tres. Go on with a walk along the idyllic streets of the town, visit the reserve of the protected griffon vultures that also find Beli a dream point, take a glance at the occasional black sheep, and finally round off our trip with a visit to a gastronomic oasis of exceptional quality, Beli Restaurant. In this gourmet nook, they will offer you a most amazing collection of vernacular recipes, of which we might pick out goulash of lamb tripe and lamb in white wine. Although artificially separated and then artificially connected to Tres, the island of Lochin gives mariners and other travellers quite different scenes than its neighbour. We will start our voyage around it from impressive Osorszczyca, 589 metres high, a climatic barrier for the southern part of the island and a nautical guide that is impossible to miss. Then we will sail along the western coast of the island and visit Liska Bay, a good anchorage and pleasant place for swimming off the pretty beach. And then off to the south to the three-pronged bay called Zabodaski, the western arm giving the best shelter. The next bay, spacious Artatore, has a whole wealth of arms and has for this reason become pretty well known among sailors. Its popularity is enhanced by the high-quality restaurant Artatore, in which the pleasant hosts will offer you a diverse bill of fare. We can particularly recommend pasta with sea spider and sea bass from the baker's oven. Though lovers of lobsters will come into their own as well. Let's sail on to elongated Mali Lochin harbour, although before tying up we could take a look at the picturesque moss passage that separates Koludarat's island and Lochin, to be taken only by those with shallow drafts. Mali Lochin itself, the biggest island city of the Adriatic, gives sailors a long quay at which to tie up, the only urban pontoon semi-marina and an actual marina in the western part by the Privlaka Strait. After you have decided where to locate your ship, have a look around this town with its pronounced maritime and tourist slant. Walk to wooded Chikat Bay, in which anchoring is prohibited. Take a dip in the clear sea and look around the graceful villas of the last century, or drop in on the eastern side of the island and the fine swimming spots around Baldarka Bay. Mali Lochin too has an attractive nightlife. In the excellent Corrado restaurant, you can try out a bit of traditional Lochin cuisine, and we would particularly recommend lamb goulash with homemade gnocchi sea spider risotto and pancakes with chard. The Barracuda restaurant will surprise you with its radically different approach, featuring carpaccio and tuna sashimi or lovingly prepared salted anchovy. After dinner you can enjoy cocktails in the general atmosphere of the popular Preco Bistro. And in the morning, before sailing out, stock up in the city fish market or in the distinctive little greengrocers. In the next part of the voyage south, you will find pretty island bays like the one with two inlets called St. Farni. Krivica, popular with sailors, fringed by a thick pine wood. Then Balvanida, the next and the last in this very particular series of bays, Plieski. Visiting the lovely anchorage and bathing spots of the nearby islands of Male and Velike Orjula, you can start the voyage round the eastern bay of Lochin. Then we set course to the north, taking a look into Yamna Bay, and after a couple of miles tying up by the pier of the pretty fishing harbour of Ravenska, the pier that was erected by Archduke and later Emperor Maximilian. Take a peek at the oldest oil press in the island, in which olives are still cold pressed into first-rate oil. In neighbouring Veli-Lochin, you can find place to tie up on the southern waterfront, walk along the quay and through the streets of this charming little town, and if you feel peckish, the Gurbica Hotel restaurant, set on a hill above the old town, offers an interesting range of Mediterranean cold hors d'oeuvre. On the way north, we will stop in at the eastern port of Mali-Lochin, Sveti Martin Bay, and then go through via the practical channel of Privlaka, with a minimum depth of 2.5 metres and a bridge that opens daily for boats at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. We shall finish our tour of the island in Nerezine, where one can tie up at one of the 3 piers and the quay of the city harbour, where, if you have any repairs to do, you can ask at the small local shipyard. Round off the general impression of the town with the shellfish fare of the Medusa Tavern, in which the rare and delicate capelunge are particularly worth your attention. We'll make our trip round the northern Adriatic even more interesting by visiting some of the smaller, but for sailors equally fascinating islands of the archipelago. First off, we'll take a trip to Unie, where on the eastern coast you will be greeted by the impressive Vela Stiena that announce the entry into the bay of the only island town, Unie. You can tie up, if you're lucky, at the only pier in the bay, or during a lull you can anchor on the sandy bottom of the spacious pebbled beach. For the hungry and thirsty, Restaurateur Yozo will clean some fresh fish. The local frogs are inexplicably peaceable, and you can enjoy some really fine twilight scenes. The western side of the island is characterized by some really nice bays. Sailors do well to sail into, anchor and swim in the bays of Vognishcha and Potkuni, while a third, called Marachol, is known far and wide in the yachting world. If you set off from Lochin southwards, after about 5 miles you will arrive at the island of Susak, which for many reasons has found itself on the Dream Point list of the Northern Adriatic. This social and natural phenomenon of the Adriatic is covered with thick layers of sandy soil, and since only vines and rushes grow upon it, one would think it belongs to some completely different clime. Another individual feature of the island is the strange traditional costume, and today's 188 inhabitants speak an equally arcane dialect. In quiet times you can anchor and swim off lovely sandy Dragocha Bay beach, and then with due care to the shallows tie up by the pier under the breakwater. After disembarkation, it is worth walking along the main sandy street to the hill where the old village is located, called Top Village. In the new or bottom village you can find some excellent pelagic fish and local wines in the appealing little tavern called Maggie. All in all, this surreal Dream Point island definitely deserves a visit and a stay. When you look carefully at a chart of the island of Rab, it will inevitably remind you of some weird and wonderful crab. Like many Adriatic islands, Rab has 2 faces and 2 characters. The eastern side is harsh, high, denuded, and during sudden borers exceptionally dangerous, while the western coast gives traveller and sailor the full blessings of its variegated coastline. We shall start off our Rabian wanderings with a look at Barbatsky Channel, from which we shall set off to the harbour of Rab town, the biggest of the island's settlements. For sailors, Rab Harbour has a well-arranged ACI marina, but there is also the rather long Vela Quay, the last 300 metres of which is meant for yachts and other informal shipping. This lovely historical town really deserves your attention, walking along its well-kept stone streets, looking into the numerous campanile, the squares, taking in the nightlife, and finally giving spice to your stay with a wonderfully prepared black risotto or seafood pasta in the Rio restaurant. We shall sail out of Rab and take a quick look into the pretty bay of St. Euphemia underneath the walls of the city, look at the popular bathing place of the Suha Punta area of town, and then go on towards the west to meet a real symphony of gentle bays and strands. The first of them is Gojinka, with a small pier and a restaurant in season. And in the next one, Shifnati, there is a nice sandy beach and a freshwater spring. The next is Christopher, and here one has to be careful of the rocks in the northern arm, while neighbouring Litovica invites you to anchor and swim in both of its arms. But the best shelter is to be found in the last of the series, Sveta Mara, where you can anchor at comfortable depths of 5 to 7 metres. If we go behind Califront Point, we'll sail into spacious Kamporska Draga, which has the occasional smaller strand, but it is best to anchor and swim around the point and off the islets of Maman, Sridnyak and Shailovac, where, however, it is necessary to sail with caution because of the many shallows. At the head of Supatarska Draga, there is another island marina with 5 pontoon piers. Behind Sorin Point, there is an unusual bay called Morice Dražica, while at the head of spacious Lopar Bay, there is a village of the same name and a ferry port. Further on in the voyage, there are unusual sights in the numerous mainly shallow little bays scattered around the peninsula behind Stoyan Point, at the eastern end of which, in Strnica Bay, is the well-known San Marino tourist centre. We will finish our voyage in these waters with a visit to the Alcatraz of the Adriatic, Goliotok, or Naked Island, where there are still traces of the notorious penal colony, which might yet be pressed into service for the tourist industry. In our further explorations of the northern Adriatic, we shall visit one more charming dream point destination, the southernmost island of the Lascine archipelago, charming Ilovik. As in ancient times, so today there is a famed anchorage in the straits between Ilovik and the islet of Sveti Petar, which has been fitted out for the yachting fraternity with 40-odd boys, and there is occasionally a place to tie up on the southern side of the long pier. The gentle little spot of Ilovik abounds in warm and typical Mediterranean scenes, dominated by bedding being aired. The local church, a well, the main street, the gull on the chimney, and the little harbour with the local vessels. Hunger and thirst, however, can best be looked after in the Belle Tavern, where they will be happy to make you stuffed Adriatic squid, belle polenta, or scorpion fish baked with vegetables. We shall start our investigation of nearby Silba with a visit to the good anchorage and bathing place in the pretty bay of Papranica, on the western side of the island. And we won't miss out on the western town port called Žalic, or on the next bay, Luka Svetog Ante. A considerably more frequented nautical haven is to be found in the eastern harbour of Silba town, called Mul, where moorings have been set out under the long pier there as well as in front of the nearby stone jetty. A pretty town of one-time mariners and ship owners, it offers plenty of mood material. It is certainly a good idea to climb up the city tower and enjoy the panoramic scenes of the landscape. Walk along the wooded town avenue, get to know the local statue-loving gull, and also to visit the Evo restaurant, in which they make excellent fish soup, chard and buzara of prawns and shellfish. Right next to Silba lies Olib, the lowest of the Zadar Islands. On its southern coast we shall visit two nice bays, Lucas Svetog Nicola and Baniva, and then head off to look around the only settlement on the island. The 100-metre-long pier with hookups for water and electricity is held responsible for all moorings in Olib. Right by the pier is an appealing bistro serving imaginative cocktails. As well as for cocktails, the locals are famed for the particular way they have of cutting and growing evergreen oak, which even today is felled and sold. In spite of the many ships in the pretty harbour, in Olib it will seem to you, as on many of the islands, that time is standing still. In the town it's worth walking to the church and the main square, having a look at the remarkable tower, or perhaps getting to know the occasional Olibian. Lunar scenes in a weird nudity, sheep, a legendary cheese and still more fabled lace are the basic identity symbols of Pag, the most indented of all the islands of the Croatian Adriatic. As you can guess, along the eastern coast one has to behave with respect to the gustings of the border, while the southern legs of the island have currents and shoals that must be looked to. We'll start our nautical exploration of Pag from Lun Point at the far northwest of the island and head on towards Tovanele, harbour for the nearby village of Lun, from which there is an impressive view of the Velebit Massif. The voyage south is marked by endless bays and coves, and the first we shall look into is Jurjevica. In the next, Slatina, there is a nice beach, while Jakishnica is decked with numerous jetties and little harbours. In Jadrešnica you will find summer restaurants, while Melnica, Potočnica, Dubac and Kanic are without exception dedicated to summer holiday homes. After this potpourri of bays, we will visit Novalia, the biggest port of the western coast, in which one can tie up by the main wharf, in the centre of which is a useful Adriatic windrose. Although very much a holiday spot, Novalia keeps in touch with its seafaring past, and in the old city streets, on the wharf and in the squares, you will come upon industrious fishermen, a rich array of traditional comestibles, and locals enjoying the shade. If you want to give the town beaches a miss, then visit the nearby bay of Stara Novalia, where you can swim and sunbathe on a nice sunny strand. For the inner person, we can recommend the pleasant setting of the Stareci More, Old Man and the Sea restaurant, on whose terrace you can tuck into marinota, a local manner of doing octopus and potato. Also worth a visit is the Stefani Bistro, where after a glass of biska or smokovacha they will offer you thick fish chowder, and we can also recommend fritai of octopus. Tourist Novalia goes on long into the night, and here there is no need to fear any shortage of nocturnal merrymaking. Further on the trip south we shall put in at the Mandre port and then sail into the bay of the village of Shimuni, where yachtsmen are offered a mooring on the only Pag marina, and then sail into the bay of the village of Shimuni, where yachtsmen are offered a mooring in the only Pag marina. On neighbouring Maun Island we will take a look at the fabulous bay of Rakovica on the eastern side, and then head off to our chosen Dream Point anchorage and bathing place of these waters in Ship Bay, on the extreme northwest of Maun. What with the clear sea, coppices, sandbanks and peninsula, here you can really enjoy the rich abundance of the Croatian Adriatic. After Maun, we shall sail on along the western coast of Pag towards the south and visit Košljun village, and then put into Povljane, where you can tie up to the head or eastern side of the pier. This island tour will end with a view of interesting localities nestled within spacious Pag Bay. Medveji Canyon is certainly worth a look, as is the nice bathing place of Ručica Bay. and the village of Metaina on the northeastern part of the bay. The western coast in Tsaska Bay has the famed swimming spot of Novalia tourists and sporting facilities on the long pebble beach of Zrče. And finally, let's have a look around the old city of Pag, famed for having the only island salt pans in the Croatian Adriatic. Pag streets are full of coastal and Mediterranean motifs, and the authentic old tavern called Bile provides a full palette of gourmet treats in the very individual setting of its interior. The younger generation can be recommended another unusual setting, the local disco, located in the spacious one-time warehouse of the salt works. In this number 2, we have decided to make it easier for sailors intending to take ship in the Northern Adriatic to choose from among the numerous attractive destinations. And so we have dreamed up 2 Dream Point nautical routes of a week each that offer a cross-section of the island charms of these waters. If you head out on a 7-day cruise from one of the Istrian or Kavanna marinas, we suggest you plan your week's Dream Point route completely in the spirit of the islands, and thus give yourself up to the most striking and typical natural and other challenges of this lovely part of the Croatian Adriatic. From Pula, Pomer or Rovinj. Day 1, Unije. Day 2, Ilovik. Day 3, Silba. Day 4, Novalia on Pag. Day 5, Rab. Day 6, Susak. From Ičići, Day 1, Valun, Cres. Day 2, Susak. Day 3, Ilovik. Day 4, Pogana on Cres. Day 5, Punat on Krk. And Day 6, Beli on Cres. Having sailed the Northern Adriatic fairly meticulously, we have come to the end of yet another Dream Point video. In order to maintain our good tradition, we are saying farewell with music once again, this time with a traditional theme from Loshin's Neresine. This nautical pilot to the Northern Adriatic will, like the others, also go through various revised and improved editions. We would like to remind loyal customers and watchers of our Dream Point Club, intended for lovers of the sea, harbours, bays and islands. So send us a letter, email or fax with your comments and become a member of the club. The most loyal members can look forward to future reductions and handsome prizes. And so, sailors and all other lovers of the Croatian Adriatic, this time too we wish you good voyages and fair seas.